Thanks for joining us at Into the Weeds. First off, we want to apologize for being absent. Life has happened. Also, Phil went on vacation, so blame him more than me, please. But we're back today. We're going to talk about gerrymandering today, and this is something that is being talked about quite a bit in the news. Let's start by understanding what gerrymandering actually is, and then we'll go a little bit more into what changes we can expect to see, or what kind of positions Phil and I have on it. Take it away, my friend Phil. Tell us what gerrymandering is.
Okay, so when we talk about gerrymandering, what we're talking about is redrawing the boundaries for congressional districts. And we're going to focus on Congress, although this happens at the state level as well, but we're going to focus on Congress. And so the way it works is that every 10 years we do a census. And then to account for changes in the population, people who've moved within a state, or people who've moved from one state to another. And so every 10 years, it's in the Constitution, a census is required, and the boundaries of the congressional districts are redrawn. And the way they're supposed to be redrawn is that within each state, because the states do the drawing of the boundaries, um, each district is supposed to have more or less the same number of people. And ideally, it's not supposed to have all these weird shapes. It should be relatively compact, like it should look like a normal community of people. So that's the general idea. And some of them can be really big. Some of them can be really small. Like so in Wyoming, for example, they only have one congressional district. The entire state is a congressional district. Whereas in California, like where we are, where I am, near the Santa Clarita Valley, the district is really small, comparatively speaking. And there are either smaller ones in downtown LA and like the metropolitan areas. So every 10 years we do the census, the maps are redrawn. That's called redistricting, right? When we get into the question of gerrymandering, and I'm not going to go into the where that term came from, but it's when the politicians draw the boundaries in a way to give one party an advantage over the other. So they're not drawing it based on sort of the communities. They're not drawing them based on geographical boundaries, some sort of logical connection between them. You'll see all these weird boundaries that are drawn so that something is either a safe Democratic district or a safe Republican district, meaning each of the parties knows that whoever wins the primary in that district is going to wind up winning in the general election. Like that's why we have so many seats that are non-competitive, that we already know before the election who's going to win, a Democrat or a
Mhm.
Republican. We may not know which Democrat or which Republican because that'll be determined in the primaries. So gerrymandering is drawing the boundaries in a way that benefits one party over another. And then there's a second kind of gerrymandering, a little more pernicious in my book, and that is gerrymandering in such a way to dilute the voting power of a particular minority group. So, for example, if you have a bunch of African Americans living in a compact area, but the boundaries are drawn in such a way that each congressional district includes part of this community, but they're connected to people who are not African American, and so they don't have the ability to elect somebody, presumably, to represent them. So that's racial gerrymandering. So we have two kinds of gerrymandering: partisan gerrymandering that's done to benefit one party over the other, racial gerrymandering done to reduce the voting power of people. Generally, this has been done in the past to dilute the voting power of either African Americans or Hispanics, Latinos. So that's the general picture of what we're talking about. And then, Jubal, I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
No, I mean that's my understanding of gerrymandering as well. I do think that the one important thing to include is in 2019, the Supreme Court came down with a decision that basically said, correct me if I'm wrong, that gerrymandering is legal and up to the states. So the federal government is not to be involved in determining how each of the states set up their particular voting districts. I believe they also said that the racial gerrymandering that you're talking about is illegal. So you can't do that by law. You can't do what Phil is talking about, where you have a community of color, and then you have adjacent districts taking dips out of it to reduce its footprint. Um, if that's the intention of the gerrymandering, and that's where things kind of get fuzzy, because how do you prove that that's the intention? What if there's a street and you have a corner, whatever. But basically, the important thing to understand is that the Supreme Court has said this is not a federal issue. This is a state issue. The states need to be responsible for managing their own districts. Do I have that right?
I think that's accurate. And I will say that I think that Supreme Court decision is terribly, terribly misguided. The problem with allowing state legislators to draw the boundaries is they draw it in a way that benefits their party, then what you have is politicians picking their voters rather than voters picking their politicians. So what the court said is this is a political dispute. We don't get involved in political
Hmm.
disputes. I personally think that's a misguided reading of it because I think it fundamentally um, shifts who should be in charge of selecting our leaders. Right? We don't want our leaders selecting our voters. We want our voters selecting our leaders. And so that's just my take on that Supreme Court decision. But yes, they did say that the Voting Rights Act is still, you still can't draw boundaries based on racial lines. And so
Hmm.
that's where we are right now. I hopefully once the composition of the courts change, I hope they'll reverse that decision. I think it was a terrible decision.
Well, I would say that if federalism is important, that the states do need to be free to manage their own voting. Otherwise, then you will have gerrymandering. You'll just have it at the federal level instead of at the state level.
I mean,
Uh,
I think the way to go, and I would like to see Congress do, and I don't know that they actually have the authority to do it because, like Jubal says, states decide our elections. Is I would love to see every state in the union adopt a independent commission. What California voted for, where it's 5 Democrats, 5 Republicans, and 4 independents, and they're the ones who draw the boundaries, and so. Um, Personally, I think that
who makes the decisions now as far as gerrymandering is concerned on a state by state level? If it's not an independent commission, is it the state legislature?
it's just the state
Okay.
legislature.
So I was thinking about that as well, and I was wondering if Congress were to enact a law, were to pass a law to basically say each of the several states shall implement an independent commission that handles their gerrymandering stuff. Would that be within the confines of the decisions that have been made?
I think that would be challenged in court and
Hmm.
probably successfully because the Constitution clearly gives the states the authority. It does give the authority to run elections. It does give there are certain protections that are involved, like you can't violate people's civil rights, things like that. Um, and so I think that the more appropriate remedy would be for the courts to go ahead and get rid of that. And it's difficult because um, I know here in California, um, the districts were drawn by the legislatures, and oftentimes there'd be a non-competitive Democratic district next to a non-competitive Republican district, and the reason it would be they could have divided it up so it's like 2 competitive districts. They agreed to divide it up, both Democrats and Republicans. Like, okay, you get a safe one, you get a safe one. Um, in a way, if that's how the legislators have done that, do you want the courts interfering with that? Probably not, right?
Mm.
Because the states have the right to decide. When it looks like the goal or when the effect of it is to disenfranchise people, that's where I think the courts need to step in. But it's not easy to do. And I don't want anybody to think that sort of drawing boundaries is an easy thing to do. I was on
Mm.
part of a commission that did that for Santa Clarita, and the level of detail was amazing
Mm.
to be able to do that. And this was at a small scale. So, but that generally what Jubal and I have been talking about is the big picture in which this whole episode with Texas doing their mid-decade redistricting. That's the contours.
So let's get into that then, because that's why it's in the news right now.
Right.
Let's talk about what's different about what's going on in Texas, and let's also talk about what Governor Newsom is suggesting as a response to that. Go ahead and
Right. So
go
in
ahead.
Texas, what they did, and depending on what news sources you believe, Donald Trump called up Governor Abbott, the governor of Texas, and said, "I want you to redraw the boundaries and get us 5 more seats." And so in Texas, the legislature is empowered to redraw the districts. So they're not doing anything illegal, whether they're doing something undemocratic, whether they're doing something bad for
Sketchy,
democracy.
sketchy.
Sketchy is separate, but it's clearly within the law of Texas that the legislature can do this. So they redrew the boundaries in such a way that it, according to it's called the Cook Political Report, and this is a the Cook Political Report is sort of a source that both Jubal and I consider to be like objective analysts of like sort of election data. And so according to their calculations, 5 districts were redrawn. They went from being House districts that have Democratic incumbents to being drawn in such a way that all 5 of those districts, if you base it on the 2024 election results, would be 10-point favors for Trump, that Trump won by 10 points or more. So the 5 districts went from being Democratic districts to between +10 and +20 for Trump. Clearly a partisan redrawing of the map. And so, and then one of them, according to the Cook report, um, they feel has a high probability of being challenged for exactly the reasons that Jubal was talking about. It looks like a clear attempt to go ahead and dilute the voting power of people of color. So one of them might be stopped in the courts, but based on the other previous Supreme Court ruling, the other 4 would basically be impervious to those kind of challenges.
There is one thing to note about those, and I'll be interested to see how that plays out. Because if that is a case of racial gerrymandering, then yeah, that needs to be addressed. However, what Republicans noticed in the 2024 election was that a larger number of Latinos were voting for Trump than they had previously. And that's part of the reason why this redistricting, at least according to the logic of the Republican Party, that's part of the reason why this redistricting is taking place, because they're like, wow, a lot of these Latinos are voting Republican, so we can kind of space it out a little bit, and as Phil says, reclaim 5 seats. Um, I think that Phil and I are going to agree that gerrymandering is can very easily turn into a gross business, right? Sketchy. It can very quickly become sketchy. However, we should note that both parties engage in this freely. This isn't something that is unique to one party or the other. This is, I think what tends to happen, and you can check me on it, Phil. I think what tends to happen is that the political parties both imagine themselves that they're going to be in charge. And so they put together this map that's going to be as beneficial as possible for them, and neither one wants to give any ground on it. And when you start to talk about, well, let's see if we can redistrict in a different way, give the power back to the people. Well, politicians aren't known for wanting to give up power. I mean, that's just the nature of politics, right? So anyway, do you want to talk about Newsom?
Well, just that in the case of the Texas redistricting, the fact that they're doing it mid decade, I
Right.
think is not a trivial
That is not
sort of
something that is
important
not
fact.
something that happens as a matter of course. That is a break with
Definitely not.
tradition.
The fact that it's not being submitted to the voters is also, I think,
Hmm.
problematic. So the politicians get to do it
Hmm.
on their own. The legislature and the governor can do it on their own. So it's not being submitted to the people for approval. And so that is also deeply problematic. And then for me, and Jubal and I have talked about this privately, if you look at political science literature and the way things have happened in the past, what typically happens is in the first midterm election after a president takes office, the out party, the party that doesn't control the White House, tends to make big gains. And so this looks like, because they're aware of this trend as well, if this looks like a naked attempt to go ahead and try and reduce the likelihood of Democrats taking control of the House, as sort of I think most political models would predict. And again, it's a long way off. A lot can happen. We don't know. So it looks like a naked political move. We can do it because we have the power and authority to do it.
Mhm.
In response, what Governor Newsom is proposing, and I believe it's now passed the legislature in California, is he's proposed essentially a map that would redraw the California congressional districts that were redrawn after the census, redraw them in such a way that Democrats would pick up 5 seats. Essentially, he's trying to counter Abbott's proposal. Um, and so some of the seats are ones where um, it would essentially be a reversal. It would go from a Republican seat to a Democratic seat, just like the ones in Texas go from Democratic to Republican. And then a couple of them, and for those of you who are in the 27th congressional district, Santa Clarita, it would turn what would be what was sort of a leaning Democratic seat, or like a toss up in favor of the Democratic seat, into a leaning Democratic seat because of the way that boundary would be would be drawn. So it would help solidify some Democratic incumbents and flip 5 seats as well. Once again, what Governor Newsom is proposing to do is have us hold a special election in November and get California voters to approve this. Now, the
Mhm.
California voters voted in favor of the independent commission, so he's going to have to convince California voters um, that this is this is necessary in order to counter what Texas has done. And there's a trigger in the amendment that basically says if Texas abandons their effort, California will go back to the maps drawn by the independent commission. And so that's where we stand right now.
So I do think it's important to reiterate that what Newsom is proposing is suspending the independent commission on redistricting,
Right.
and essentially doing the same thing that Abbott is doing, right? Um, my understanding, and again, I'll kick it back to Phil when I'm done. My understanding is that if this turns into a gerrymandering arms race, where other states start chiming in and proposing redistricting, and again, middle term redistricting. Usually, redistricting happens just after the census comes out. This is a departure from that, right? It's a rare thing, but it is something that both parties have done before. It's just not a very common thing. So if this turns into a gerrymandering arms race and we go state to state to state, my understanding is, and I'll double check with Phil, that ultimately Republicans have more seats they could pick up.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, even just so you know, like even going ahead and talking about there would be 5 seats um, that Republicans would pick up. The Cook political report said that it would be between 3 and 5,
Mhm.
because as much as we try and predict how people are going to vote, we really don't know. So
Right.
if Latinos who voted for Trump in 2024 either vote Democratic or don't show up to the polls, then the best laid plans,
Sure.
might fall apart. Uh, so I don't know what the overall um, estimate is, but I think that for Democrats, what they're not going to do is stand by and let this happen without responding. And so I think and way back a while ago, Jubilant, when we started this, um, our first discussion was on authoritarianism, and
Mhm.
we focused in particular on a book called How Democracies Die. And one of the two things that they talk about in there as sort of precursors to a country becoming more authoritarian is that one is that when people no longer tolerate the idea that you can lose an election, democracy survive when we look at our opponents, the people on the other side of the aisle, not as mortal enemies, but as people who have a legitimate right, to try and gain power. And if they get power, then it's like, okay, we'll live to fight another day. So that's what they
Mutual,
mean.
that's mutual tolerance.
That's mutual tolerance, right? And then the other part is institutional forbearance. And that is that you don't use every tool that is legal to try and solidify your grab on power.
Mhm.
Um, and so that is also when you see a lack of institutional forbearance, that is one of those indicators that you're moving in an authoritarian direction. To me, what Texas is doing falls into this lack of institutional forbearance. What Newsom is doing is the same thing, a lack of institutional forbearance. I would make one big distinction between Texas's proposal and Newsom's proposal, and that is Newsom is going to submit his proposal to the voters. So um, there's another organization that analyzes the competitiveness of districts and grades redistricting efforts. This isn't one that Jubal and I agreed on, but it's one I'm familiar with. And so I went and I looked at it. Hold on, I'm pulling it up in my notes. So it's called the Princeton Gerrymandering Project, right? And what they do is they basically grade gerrymandering on, when boundaries are redrawn on partisan fairness, right? Does the map give one party a durable edge out of the proportion of its vote share? Competitiveness, does it create swing districts or does it just basically lock in incumbents? Geography and compactness, right? Are the lines drawn like, are they sensible or do they snake around to pick up voters? And then minority representation. Now, the Princeton report card, when it looked at the Texas redistricting plan, it gave it an F, right?
Mhm.
And so I tried to do some research to find out um, if they had graded Newsom's proposal yet. And they had not. So I went on to ChatGPT, calm down, everybody, it can be useful. I went on to ChatGPT and I said, well, based on your understanding of the factors that Stanford uses, how do you think it would grade Newsom's proposal? And it came to the conclusion that it would give it a D or an F. So um, nobody should make any mistake about what Newsom is doing. I want to be clear. I completely support his efforts, right? And I'm somebody who's
So
concerned about institutional forbearance, but I think you have to respond to this stuff in a vigorous way.
I understand. What I would say is that I don't support either Abbott or Newsom in their efforts. I think that more of a bad thing doesn't make a good thing. I also think that for maybe a couple of the most salient examples of unfair gerrymandering, you could look at Massachusetts, which is 40% of the population of Massachusetts is Democrat, and there are 0 Republican districts in Massachusetts. And then just take a look at the map of Illinois, the voting map. Just look at the districts. I think that's one that actually Stephen Colbert talked about on his show as being especially ridiculous. Um, as much as I don't support what Abbott is doing, I don't think that adding more fuel to the fire is a good idea for Newsom to do that, especially if he's reversing a commission that has been established to prevent exactly this. I don't like gerrymandering. I wish that we could just set up a grid. But again, the Supreme Court says this is a state issue. This is something the states have to manage, and as long as the states are free to manage it, they're going to do it in a way that is beneficial to the politicians in those states. Um, I don't like it. I don't like this naked power grab, and I
And I want to be
wish.
clear, I would not, if Newsom came up with this proposal first,
Mhm,
I would totally not support it.
mhm.
If he came up with this proposal, said this is what we're going to do, think you're going to win big in the midterms, but we want to pad our victory. Here's my proposal. One, it would have been completely hypocritical. Two, I know as somebody who voted for the commission, I would have voted against it. He would have a tough time selling me on that. But the idea of standing by and letting Texas do what I consider to be obvious partisan and racial gerrymandering and not responding in kind, um, it's going to be. I find that objectionable, and I'm glad he's taking the initiative. And I hope Texas backs down, quite frankly. I mean, they can still do their gerrymandering in 2000, in 2030 when the next census gets done. That's fine, but doing it like this is problematic. So I will vote for and advocate for this constitutional amendment. But I do want to point out a difference between the Texas proposal and the California proposal. California voters are going to have a chance to vote on this proposal. It's going to be a challenge for Newsom to convince Californians to do it.
I don't know if challenge is the right word. I think that Californians are pretty safely blue. But
You
I
know what?
will.
I looked at the polls, and it's early on, so mostly what I've been getting already are flyers against it, mailers against it. There's a lot of money against it. Um, I do think it's going to be a challenge because he's not only going to have to convince Democrats, he's also going to have to convince independents that this is what needs to be done.
Mhm,
And mid these kind of special elections are notorious for low voter turnout, and so it's not
mhm.
only convincing them of his argument, but it's also
Convincing
convincing
him to
them to
show
get
up.
out and vote.
Right,
Right.
right.
So I do think it's going to be. I don't think it's a slam dunk in any way whatsoever. But I will
And
be working fervently to get it
I
in my
understand.
little neck of the woods. Yeah.
I understand, and I don't blame you. But my concern is that this is going to lead to a gerrymandering arms race, and we're going to just see state after state start taking it upon themselves to even the score, so to speak. And the ultimate result is going to be um, further disenfranchisement of voters, whether they're
Mhm.
Republican or Democrat. You're taking away the volatility of the voting public every time you gerrymander, and this is just going to lead to more gerrymandering. So what's the solution? I don't think it's fair that Abbott is just jumping out and saying, "Hey, I'm going to get 5 more seats," but I also don't think it's smart of Newsom to jump out and say, "I'm going to countermand that," because that it begs a response. And
And I think not responding would be a huge problem.
so what if we get through
Like I
this?
said before, the problem with gerrymandering, any gerrymandering, is we don't want politicians going ahead and picking their voters. We want voters picking their
Right.
politicians. And so what what Abbott is trying to do is essentially ensure that Donald Trump still has a Republican majority for the second half of his administration. Ultimately, that's what they're concerned about. They have every reason to be concerned, but you don't win an election by drawing the boundaries in the middle of a decade. You win by the strength of your arguments and the
Right.
policies that you propose. And the problem is that right now the policies that are being proposed are not popular. And so I think it's a reasonable response to an effort on the part of Donald Trump and, um, in this case, so far, just the Texas Republicans to rig an election. And
Mhm.
that's, make no mistake about it, that's what they're trying to do. They're
That
trying
that
to rig
is
this election.
that is absolutely
So
what they're trying to do. But two wrongs don't make a right. And my again, my concern is that this is going to spread.
I
Uh,
think, and again, and I get two wrongs don't make a right, but some uh, a lack of action in the face of a blatantly undemocratic move, the consequences of that are even worse. Doing
mhm.
nothing is unacceptable. It's and I think for many Democrats um, who feel like the Democratic Party hasn't done enough to push back against Donald Trump. I think for many Democrats, it's like, okay, finally,
I don't know what
they're
else they could do to push. I mean,
well, it's hard for them in Congress to push back, right? Because they're a minority in the
no,
House and in the Senate, right? So the only thing they can push back on are non-reconciliation bills in the Senate, where they have the
yeah,
ability to filibuster. So that's where we are right now, you guys. That's where we are right now. And so
it's a gross situation. But depending on how this turns out, the ideal would be for both states to back down. I think, but I'm not banking on that. I'm not betting on
Right.
that. So my concern is that
And
we're
and
going to
and
see.
let's not be coy about this. Donald Trump is behind this.
Do you
He's
know
the
that
one
for
urging.
sure?
Yeah,
You
he's made many comments about it.
he's made
I
comments
think he was
about,
the first one who publicly said we can get 5 more seats.
but I mean, you know that he called Abbott and said, "I want you to get these five
No, of
seats."
course I don't know that, but Jubal, I I pay attention to what people say,
Okay.
right?
Okay.
And so he talks about it. He thinks this is a good thing.
Hmm.
It's undemocratic. What they're doing is undemocratic. It's a
I
violation of norms.
I agree.
He's okay with that. He's okay with violating those norms. You're okay with him violating those kind of norms, and
Well,
so that's where we
again,
are. So I'm glad.
Newsom is also violating those norms, and he's doing
Again,
it.
I'm not going to disagree with you. Newsom is violating those norms in response to a violation,
Mhm,
and this is really important. He's submitting his proposal to the voters of California.
mhm.
That's the difference. It's not happening among the policymakers, the leaders choosing their voters. So that's what's happening in Texas. California will get to decide how it's going to elect its leaders. And that is a huge difference. I think
Well,
that's why,
hang
I
on a
think that's,
second. Let
yeah,
me. I need to poke a hole in that because
go ahead.
if Texas was to submit it to the voters, it would pass.
I don't know. Again,
I think that it would, and the reason that Newsom is
it,
submitting, hang on, the reason
okay.
that Newsom is submitting this to the voters is because he has to, because he's suspending the nonpartisan commission. So this isn't Governor Newsom being forthright and
Well,
thoughtful
I
about it.
mean,
Both Abbott and Newsom,
whether it's him being forthright or not, that proposal is being submitted to the voters. The Texas proposal
because it has to be.
is not, and it could be. I don't think Abbott wants a vote on his gerrymandering
Mhm,
because you're right. You've mentioned it before. There was a movement in Trump's direction
mhm,
in 2024. But as Jubal and I have talked about privately, if you look at Trump's approval ratings among Hispanics, they are very, very low. They do not agree with his policies, his immigration policies, the way they're being carried out. Um, so um, I think ultimately, if it went to a vote, I'm not sure how Texas would vote, but
I
I'm saying I'm not sure how Texas would vote the same way I'm saying I'm not sure how California will vote.
mhm.
You just never know. You just
I think
never know.
the polling that you're talking about refers to Latinos as a group. But if you're talking about voting Latinos, I don't know that you're going to see that same demarcation.
Like that,
Uh,
yeah, I don't.
I
I think that I don't know that because there's a website I use, Decision Desk Headquarters, and I don't think it allows me to look at likely voters and the Hispanics.
mhm.
But the separation between them is in. I mean, if you want, I'm happy to display it here, and we can
we
take a
we
look at it.
we
But the
can
separation is
that
huge,
might even be
huge.
too far into the weeds even for us. But let's just leave it at this. Let's just say this.
Okay,
I I wish that this wasn't happening for my part. I wish that politicians would do less gerrymandering. And when I say that, I mean all politicians, Abbott and Newsom. I don't think that you can say that Abbott gerrymandering is a threat to democracy, but Newsom gerrymandering is not. I think that it is takes power away from the people every time that you gerrymander, and so I don't want to see an arms race. Two wrongs don't make a right. That's basically where I'm at. I'm just kind of disappointed in Abbott.
okay. And for me, I see a president and a governor who are moving in a um, very undemocratic direction. They're essentially trying to rig an election in favor of Republicans. And I see Governor Newsom responding, but responding in a measured way, saying, one, this is not what we prefer to do. If Texas abandons efforts, we'll go back to the maps drawn by the commission. And it's going to be submitted to the voters. And Jubal's right, it has to be submitted to the voters. I think, but it is, to me, no longer acceptable. As I watch this country slide into more and more authoritarian policies, um, I want vigorous responses from Democrats, independents, and pro-democracy Republicans to nip this in the bud. And so this is one of those unfortunate things where um, Jewel's right. There could be an arms race, right? And who
Mhm.
knows how that ends.
Right.
But standing by and doing nothing is unacceptable to
So
me.
what's just real quick, just a couple minutes, what's the fix? What's the solve?
I mean, a national policy where everybody does independent commissions is the ideal solution, right? That's the ideal solution, and so
But you don't think that would
that's
pass muster in the Supreme
I
Court?
don't know if that would pass muster constitutionally, and my guess would be that uh, Republican states would challenge its constitutionality.
Mm.
Right. There are actually quite a few Democratic states that have independent commissions. I didn't see very many Republican states that had them, but California did it. Now, just to be clear, when California did it, um, and so you might think, oh, Republicans must have picked up seats. Actually, when California went to the independent commission, Democrats picked up seats. Um, you know, um, the reason being is that when the state legislators were setting the boundaries, they would frequently, as I said at the very beginning, draw districts and say, hey, you guys get this one, we'll get this one. And so when it came time to vote for the maps, Republicans would vote for them too because they were guaranteed certain districts.
Mhm.
So when we went to the independent commission, there was actually an increase in Democratic representation in California, and I think another state as well. But it's because of the way the maps have been drawn before. So
So, and
that's some into the weed shit,
that
you
is some into
guys.
the weed shit. So
There we go.
the reality is in California, you've got similar to Massachusetts, you've got 40 to 42% of the population is Republican, but only less than 20% representation in Congress, right? That's what you've got,
Right,
and that's with an independent commission. So I don't know that independent commissions are the ideal if you can still get this kind of gerrymandering. Ultimately the only fair way to do things is to grid, just just lay a grid over the United States. Each square is a district, and that's not going to be great either, but what the hell do you do?
no,
If anybody has any suggestions on how to fix the gerrymandering issue, we would love to hear it. Please post. also
absolutely.
if you're still listening, it means you must really like this show. We're kicking around the idea of doing a new series, and we're just going to throw it out there. Anybody who wants to respond, please feel free. We're going to talk about the difference between something being in the news and something being newsworthy. So that is to say, media loves to talk about certain things. There are stories that are perpetuated and promulgated all over the place. But what kinds of things are actually newsworthy, are actually important to voters? Because ultimately, that's the purpose of the media, is to inform the voting public. Who would be interested in seeing a series on news versus newsworthy? We would like to know. So if you feel
Right.
like
And then
chiming in,
keep in
please do.
mind that I disagree fundamentally with Jubal on what the goal of the media is. The goal of the media is to make money, which
Mm,
is how we get back to the news versus newsworthy stories, right?
right.
Um, people who things that are on the news
Are
are
things that
things
get
that
clicks, they get views,
they get
right?
clicks, they get watched, right? Exactly. Just because they get watched, does that mean it's newsworthy, like
Right.
worthy of our attention, worthy of their resources? And that's ultimately what Jubal and I are talking about, is sort of what's the difference between each of those. So if you guys have any thoughts, uh, share them with us. We'd love to get more comments on the discussion board. And for those of you who are loyal voters, if you don't mind, um, if you could just put your first name in the on the page. You don't have to put anything that's going to identify you where people can attack you or whatever. But it would be nice to know, because it seems like there's a group of people, a small group, a select group, a very select
Select,
group,
a
very
select
select
group.
group who are paying attention to this, and it would be kind of fun to know who you guys are. So,
Absolutely.
anyways,
Absolutely.
there we
Thanks
go.
for watching, everybody. We'll see you next time around. Take care.
Later on.